record, and we are good. So this is a continuation, and I would say probably the last part of exercise 5. Essentially, exercise 6 is really just the final requirements and starting to work with Photoshop and make some of these images and perspectives start to look pretty nice. They'll come with certain requirements, obviously, for our final. And I know a lot of us are probably in studio or even have a separate final to worry about, especially in other classes. So very typically I try to end this one at week 15 rather than week 16 where everybody's extremely busy. And I even count it as the final. We don't have a final exam actually in this class, so that is definitely a plus. However, it also makes this project weigh a little bit more, so do keep that in mind. But just a continuation from last time, we definitely talked about in exercise 5 part 2 that essentially we're making a digital puzzle in many cases, basically separating each of these parts. So I wanted to start going over one of the greatest tools that Rhino has, and that's the ability to unroll surfaces. But I also wanted to go over some key concepts because I think it's pretty obvious to some that some of these columns, some of these beams, some of these structural elements are obviously not going to be laser cut. Those would be purchased at scale. So you would find dowels that are 1/8, that are 1/16. Of course, 1/16 by 1/16 would be a 6 by 6 inch column at 1/8 scale. And hopefully that's making sense to some of us. How relatively speaking, some things you can't just purchase, right? You can't just purchase this wonderful cylindrical piece with a hole in it. So of course we're going to have to make those things. However, at the same time, we also want to start getting rid of things that we know we aren't going to make. After all, we do have a copy, so we could potentially use that for rendering or creating perspectives eventually. So this is essentially my puzzle piece model and kind of has its own copy, if you will. However, I mentioned last time, before we start laser cutting the topography, you might want to make accommodations for what you have going on in your piece. For instance, I have a bunch of these extrusions and I may want to actually lift that up a little bit more and get that just right. Obviously letting some of the stairs blend in and letting some of the stairs maybe go down some of those things. After all, essentially at 1/8 scale, a 1/8 piece equals a foot. So essentially most cardboard comes at 1/8 inch, and that already has a scale attuned to it. So in our case, we do have to do a little bit of extra critical thought. And I've brought in at least 3 of the arguably a little bit better of models. Obviously, for different reasons. Some of them, they're stairs. I want you to look at the quality and the way that they actually made these stairs, because you don't necessarily have to make it exactly like the digital model. We can prepare for that actually in the digital model as well. So a couple of things. First things first, I think I'll turn off my rails or essentially get rid of them. I mean, I do have a copy of them, so I don't necessarily need them. So again, I still have some refinement to do. As you guys noticed from last time, we were still starting to take these pieces apart, refine them, cut them, blend them together, and for some of us, maybe even exploding them. For instance, my stair is all one piece. I may actually want to explode that, break it down, and start to understand it bit by bit. However, one of the most important things I'd like to go over today is definitely the topography and getting that really ready, right? So, well, to make it easier on myself, I'd probably want to cut out my topography, glue that together, but then actually start placing my vertical columns in. Now those would be purchased, right? Those would be actually bought from the store, and relatively simply I could just, cut them myself. I mean, obviously some of these dowels, they come, in 2 or even 3 feet. Arguably even on Amazon they come in like 4 feet. But we don't have to work so hard. In fact, I can make a copy of essentially all of them or start to turn off obviously some of these elements that are getting in the way. So in my case, turn off some of the exercise 3 that I don't need. Arguably maybe even the grids. Maybe I do want to keep some of my other work. Oh, looks like this is where my organization doesn't pay off, because I do want these beam elements as well. I mean, why work harder when I can work smarter? In my case, I might want to separate that first, but at least for the sake of tutorial, let's keep going. In my case, let's get rid of the stairs. And we really just need some of these pieces. Now, some of this I know I don't need, like the handrails, everything like that. So I'll continue to delete that as well. I will say exercise 5 just takes a long time. And mostly because there's a lot of planning involved. But again, that planning that goes along in the digital realm ends up saving us a lot of money in the physical realm, I could argue. Because a lot of that planning is kind of done on the spot, right? Especially in architecture school. But relatively speaking, the first thing I want to do before I start to trim them is Boolean difference these out of here, right? So essentially I'll take the entire piece, Boolean split or difference, and start to get rid of some of these pieces. So I'll get rid of that one, as well as all of these at once. I'll hit enter, and of course you should start to see little holes, if you will. Obviously we want to laser cut those holes. Nobody wants to sit there on each piece and be like, am I getting this right? No. In fact, we'll have the pattern that we've created, whether it be arbitrary or pretty congruent, actually etched into the piece. Does that make sense, guys? Split it out, right? Once we do that, I won't necessarily get rid of it, but I'll take these pieces, copy, and basically move them out. I guess I could have just moved them too, but in my case, still refining, still getting rid of things that I know I don't need or that are just kind of getting in the way, right? Obviously pieces that I use to make the piece, but don't necessarily need anymore, such as these curves, all kinds of things to get in the way. But relatively speaking, you should almost even see the piece still there, so we might have to get rid of it. And arguably it's kind of hard to see when it's all green, so you might choose something like a ghosted view and see that arguably not much better, but you can definitely tell there's some spacing in between. Now what's kind of nice is now when I take these pieces out, such as this one, and make 2D, now it's essentially ready to go. I mean, that saves me hours of time just right there, right? Now don't get me wrong, that's a pretty small cut, and the laser cutter will cut that, but it won't save the little piece that it does cut out, right? Because that is just so small, and it's gonna get sucked through the machine, right? However, in this case, we don't really need them. I mean, they're so small, they're gonna get sucked into the trash anyway. And, well, that's kind of an experiment in itself, right? See the limitations, if you will. How small can you make a piece? Or even control the laser cutter to just etch it to where you can kind of push it out is also another alternative, but definitely takes some skill and arguably a lot of tries, if you ask me. But from here, I can make 2D and essentially now get that piece and send it to the laser cutter. I don't know about you, but as a student before a laser cutter, I would sit there with these pieces. Another thing that I could do is essentially print this out on a regular piece of paper, put it on the piece of cardboard, and use it as a template. Again, that's a game saver right there. I mean, and don't get me wrong, for some of these pieces, you'll realize a laser cutter is maybe the best way. Perhaps doing it by hand is the best way for other parts. And you'll see what I mean, especially today when we get to some curvilinear elements as well. However, to be said, you can use a laser cutter. You can cut multiple pieces and stitch them together in reality, right? I mean, after all, we do have glue, we have tacky glue, and they often say, I think duct tape holds the universe together. But in our case, I would want to get that piece by piece. So before I start laser cutting my topography, make sure that you remove some of the pieces that you know you don't need. In my case, I still have a couple of things. So even though I got the vertical columns out of there, I may have some stairs that I also want to incorporate. So in my case, let's turn on those stairs again. And to be completely honest with you, this is a really hard piece to make. For instance, if we unroll it, so let's make a copy of it and take a look at the unrolling sequence. I don't know if I've shown this yet, but essentially we can unroll surfaces. So as long as they're closed objects, keep in mind this does not work with an open object, right? So if you're missing one face on that piece and you unroll surface, it's just going to explode on you. Nothing will be connected, and relatively speaking, you might as well make it by hand. To be fair, I know that this piece is going to have to require actually almost similar to the topography, right? I mean, it basically even looks like topography if you look at it closely. A very well-structured topography, but topography nonetheless. In my case, let's orient that a little bit better. Now, some of it, though, could be potentially laser cut, but let's check it out. Let's unroll surface, enter. In my case, I'm going to not choose explode, otherwise there are hundreds of pieces in there. So I'm going to not explode it. I don't necessarily need labels unless I'm just really working a very complex piece. And keeping properties, try that out because sometimes it'll keep things stitched together versus it kind of knows when it's not going to be, it's going to fold in on itself and not be laser cut. So let's keep those settings. Let's hit enter and see what happens. Not bad, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's pretty wild. And arguably might not even fit on a sheet for a laser cutter, right? There's that. But also, some of these pieces actually fold in on itself. And if I laser cut that, I'm actually going to end up with a third triangular piece. So that's not going to work either. So I may have to go with an exploded view or explode this one and actually laser cut it piece by piece. In fact, some of these pieces, well, that might actually work, right? And you can kind of see it, can't you? If I were to laser cut this piece out and essentially fold it back together almost like an accordion shape. Now, arguably, that's a lot of work, right? I mean, that's a lot of separate pieces, and just like a car mechanic, the more pieces or parts that you have, the more chances, literally, of failure of those parts, which is probably actually a design choice for most cars because that's money for the mechanic and money in parts. I would purposely even design a car to be fixable. Why? That way I could, well, once it breaks down, I make more money and you have to purchase a new car. Now, in architecture school, we don't want to make models over and over again. After all, we're at community college and let's face it, we don't have all the money in the world to just be making and pumping out models. We got things to do. So this might not be the best way to, of course, tackle this part. So let's maybe try another thing. For instance, I could take a look at this part strongly and go, well, actually I see a series of pieces, right, that actually I can manipulate and or even draw on, right? So I could take my polyline tool and simply just trace these pieces out. Now, no, there's not entirely a perfect way to just automatically trace all this, and I probably wouldn't trace anything in a ghosted mode, by the way, because it will pick up easily the underbelly. But I could do it just like the topography. Now, arguably, this does take a little bit extra work, but if you've actually kept track of all your pieces, it might not be so bad. But for instance, that is a lot easier to cut out of cardboard than necessarily folding all these pieces kind of in a magical way. Don't get me wrong, you can get any model, a model of a car, and you can unroll that surface. And that might be the best way because you have a lot of curvilinear surfaces on a car, right? That makes sense. However, in this case, you might have to think outside the box a little bit. Use other techniques in order to fashion something that is a little bit more realistic. However, you may have wondered if I do that, I'm going to get stairs kind of on the underbelly. So I could explode this and get the pieces that I do want, such as this one, that one, this one, that one, this one, that one, that underbelly, if you will. It's not the most scientific term, but kind of all the outer parts, if you will. And I could potentially fold those and put those back together. So for instance, even though these are all exploded and I selected these, I'm going to go ahead and join them again. So J-I-O-N, join. And we'll notice that's one piece. Now let's try the unroll surface. Awesome. Enter. And arguably, that is much more doable. You see the difference though, right? It recalculated that folding for us, but it was based on a very specific reason that we gave it, a very specific object, right? So keep that in mind. I would say what makes exercise 5 so difficult is, well, we have to critically think about every single bit and piece, and that's just true of architecture. And for some of you in studio, you know this all very well, or starting to develop this very well, that it takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of critical thinking, and especially even more when it comes to building a model. After all, some things work in a digital realm that just don't work in a physical realm, right, to say the very least. However, this is something I could potentially laser cut, and as you can see, I still am getting a fold in on myself. So I may want to, of course, explode this. And even from here, I'm not exactly finished, guys. I would want to also make 2D. That way I can get those shapes. So let's say that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and make 2D from a top view. Make 2D. Top view. Apply. And potentially that would be the one that I actually start to laser cut. Does that make sense, guys? Hopefully so. Because I would say this is where students arguably have the most struggle, because it does take a lot of three-dimensional oriented thinking. However, once that piece is done, I move on, right? And arguably I don't need to keep these pieces, but I forgot this one, so I can't leave that one behind. Also, I see that there's overlapping pieces, so I'm going to kind of move that out of the way and rotate it. And again, this is where being organized definitely comes in handy, right? So not only do I need to make the topography pieces of that, but I'd also need to make the underbelly, and of course kind of fold that around. Potentially, I could even double material it now. Now this could be quote-unquote concrete or chipboard, whereas maybe those topography layers that I made, right, this piece, maybe those are basswood and very thin in order to actually make a really nice model. Not gonna lie to you, you could use this technique to make some very badass models, excuse my French. But realistically speaking, just like we do in graphics and when we print something, we're trying to make it analog, the same thing could be applied to a laser cutter, guys. We don't want to make it look like it was made on a laser cutter. Sure, we want to use it for its accuracy, but we don't want necessarily the burn marks. Now, luckily on chipboard, there's not a lot of burn marks. Luckily on cardboard, there's not a lot of burn marks. However, if you use museum board or basswood, it's definitely got a burn mark. We can't sandpaper museum board, it'll just fall apart. Same with chipboard. But we can sand basswood. And let me tell you, that is the game's secret, is laser cutting in basswood, but leaving yourself a little bit of an offset so that you can actually sand it off and make it look like it was hand done. Can't tell you enough. I used to actually have a professor at Texas Tech that if he saw burn marks, he didn't even count the model. So again, I'm not that harsh, but you may run into a professor that is that harsh. However, we've just talked about the stairs. Let's also talk about removing it from the topography, because that may be something we want to integrate, and maybe actually easier to leave the stairs intact, or as you can see, I can take that away from the topography easier than I can take it away from the stairs. Does that make sense? So for instance, sorry, was there a question? Yeah, please.
The burn marks on the laser cutter, is that always going to happen, or does that
Always.
happen after a certain amount of time that it's in use?
It's just always. It's just the name of the game of the material. Now there are some ways to mitigate it, such as putting blue painter's tape on both sides of your, say, museum board or chipboard. That will really start to eliminate some of the fuzz that you just can't get away with. However, if you got really tiny parts, you're sitting there taking off a lot of tape, which arguably takes even more time than sometimes just doing it by hand. However, it depends on the situation, and it also depends how much time you have. It's a really great question. How can I mitigate some of those things on the laser cutter? To be fair, test some things out. There's nothing wrong with getting a sample piece of material, trying different things on it. Now, obviously don't choose flammable items to stick on there, but you'd be surprised. I would say painter's tape is probably often the best because it doesn't adhere to the material so badly. Whereas if you try to use like duct tape, for instance, it's going to destroy that piece, right? Unless it's like acrylic or something. And you can cut acrylic on this laser cutter as well. However, probably not needed for this project, as we don't really have much windows or water for that matter. But back to my point, it might be actually easier to remove this stair from the topography. So let's go actually ahead and do that first. In my case, I'm going to do a Boolean split again and actually use this piece, just because I know those pieces actually touch the ground, as well as all of these. enter, and let's see what it does. Nice, it actually worked. So I'll take all these pieces and see what happened. And naturally we have some of those things. It kind of added one here, that's kind of funny. So not working on this guy, apparently. Let's get rid of that. Oh, there's the piece that it was supposed to take out. I don't know why it added it in. That's kind of funny. Not haha funny, but like, you know, different. Let's try that again. Maybe in a simpler way. We'll use our Boolean difference instead. We'll use this as an object, enter, and we'll use this as our subtractor and see if that works out better for us. So again, Boolean split, Boolean difference, you'd be surprised, and Boolean difference failed, and it gives us where it failed to. So not everything's going to work, not everything's going to succeed, and that's okay. Let's try that Boolean split again, but maybe one piece at a time. Sweet. That seems to work out a little bit better. But as you can see, again, we'd want to laser cut that out, right? I mean, who wants to sit there and like measure that all day? Oh, got rid of it a little too much. But yeah, we'd want to remove some of those pieces. And then of course, even make 2D that. So even if you don't get the perfect three-dimensional piece, that's okay, because we just need it to transfer into a two-dimensional realm. So I'll take that one, make 2D. Let's get it actually over here maybe. And I can still actually arguably even refine that better in 2D than I can in 3D. And there you have it. Even though it wasn't actually a hole there, I can cut it as one, and of course I actually have accidentally two lines there. So I'll explode and refine it. So again, I really just wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of some of these elements that, gosh, I wish somebody taught me along the way. But really just trying to share the secrets with you. Stuff that I've learned along the way and have been taught that usually you don't find in a YouTube video because, well, that's job security. However, that's what you guys pay me for, is obviously the job realm. So I'm going to share some of the trade secrets with you. And arguably, I just saved myself 30 minutes time. Instead of trying to model it perfect, I get it perfect where it needs to be perfect. Does that make sense? Anyway, I know I'm kind of talking a lot today. So, and using my hands a lot too. Arguably won't get on the recording. So, again, piece by piece, brick by brick, as they say in architecture, right? But again, starting with the foundation, you'll see that I definitely start off with the topography first, right? Getting each and every one of those pieces cut out, and arguably removing things that I don't need. And that's a funny little piece, right? Arguably, there's no way that the laser cutter can do that. It can't cut at that angle, right? So which one would I take, guys? The top piece or the bottom piece? Hard to say. It's kind of a trick question. It depends, right? Well, if I take the bottom make 2D, well, it's going to require that there's going to be a hole at the top, right? If I take the top piece, well, arguably they're not going to see the bottom. So I take the top piece, right? Because then I could slide that in, and arguably once I cut it, I could get the X-Acto blade and actually make that angle if I wanted to. To be fair, you probably don't need to for this project. Or you could even, after you model those stairs, chop those stairs off. Again, fake it till you make it, right? But keep in mind that in a world of digital, we do often see it, especially in a ghosted view, but in the physical world, certain items actually hide things. And what I mean by that is, for instance, some of these parts are kind of fake. They look like they go into the ground because they actually do. Whereas some of them, they've actually trimmed this wall in order to slide and make it appear like it's going into the ground. Does that make sense? Again, I know that's not going to be necessarily on the recording, but I definitely take a really good look at these because some of them are actually faker than they appear, right? And some of those techniques, of course, were already practiced by other students. So it makes a lot of sense to look at where we're going with this. And again, some of the techniques that may actually look familiar on your project. However, that is definitely the nitty-gritty. Not everybody's going to run into this exact situation. However, some of you have gotten fancy with the stairs, and I appreciate that, but it definitely does make an interesting and harder to build model. But my goodness, the reward I think outweighs the work, because that is beautiful. You know, the way the stairs can go from one topography to the other topography, and really is a game changer in terms of what you can do in studio, right, to say the very least. Arguably, this is something that even professionals today are still working on, how we take the digital realm and make it in reality, except it's on a grander scale and you're getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to do so. So there is a difference. But we do want to practice it as a student, because you may very well be hired for this exact reason and your knowledge on this. If you want to pursue this, I would definitely encourage you to go to Texas Tech, where they have an amazing digital design and fabrication certificate, right? Which is where I, of course, learned a lot of this. However, I won't share it all with you because, well, there's just not enough time in the world, and I know we have other things to do. So let's continue, and let's just get to these stairs, arguably one of the hardest parts. I would recommend that you do it bit by bit. So, for instance, right now, oops, I have a large bit, and I can't just unroll this, because that would literally hurt me, right? It's just like awful. However, one thing you may notice is, well, I do have certain planar elements, right? So like these observation decks, man, those seem pretty simple. I can make those out of chipboard and actually make the stairs separate and actually just glue that myself. There's no need to try to magically do it all in one piece. Don't get me wrong, that sounds great on paper and maybe in the mind like, oh man, I'm gonna knock this out all in one piece. Easier said than done, right? One thing that I would recommend is, honestly, when in doubt, break it down piece by piece. And you'll notice some of these students, the way they actually accomplished the stairs was laser cutting the stringers of the piece and then just cutting out little pieces to glue on to those stringers and left it hollow. That's absolutely fine. Some of them really did go the whole way, and actually those stairs are pretty hollow themselves. Some of us have floating stairs. Well, maybe there's 2 stringers in the middle, and again, basswood steps, right? Something arguably I could probably purchase at 1/8 scale is a foot. So 1/8 by 1/16 dowels. You can get that. You can get them in packs of like 32 pieces at 1 foot. And that's enough for an entire model. I think it's about $3 or $4, right? Especially at Hurwicks. Anyway, we'll talk about that once we get there. But for instance, breaking this down, I could explode this, but I don't recommend it because there's a lot of pieces, but let's go for it. Explode. And I can basically put these back together as necessary. So this piece right here, maybe I do want to keep that as one solid piece. Maybe I don't. Maybe I can't. Maybe it's already together too badly. So again, just exploding something isn't always going to help. In our case, knowing our model pretty well, and that is the critical thinking I'm talking about, we know that I actually copied my piece over and over again. So one thing I could do is actually make one and copy it over and over again. For instance, I know I have this one, I have number 2, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 of them. So I'd make 10 of them. But, well, I don't really have to worry about this piece anymore except for that. And I really just need to make 10 of these. Is that making some sense? Well, let's check that out. That might be actually easy to unroll. So let's make a copy. And let's just try it out. Unroll surface. And let's not explode and choose keep properties and see how that turns out. Actually, not too shabby. I mean, well, besides that overlapping here, not too bad. But realistically speaking, if it is too bad, right? I mean, let's face it, the stair part, nobody wants to like do that to every single accordion, and arguably it might not even look that good. Also, another thing to keep in mind is we can only score one side. We can't score the other side at the same time. We can't just flip it over and score the other side because aligning it is near impossible, right? There is a way on a CNC machine, but not exactly possible on a laser cutter. So again, some of this stuff is just impractical. So leave it alone, but maybe save it to maybe remind yourself, hey, I gotta make these with dowels, those kinds of things. So I'm gonna go ahead and explode mine and get rid of the elements that, well, I know I can't make on a laser cutter. However, some of these elements I definitely can. Like that last one, I could definitely fold that with my piece and fold it underneath. No big deal, right? However, some of this, well, that's not going to cut because, well, it's going to cut 2 pieces out of each other and make very funky triangles. So again, I may either need to discard it completely, or again, use the parts as necessary. So there's my stair piece. And if I know I have two, shoot, I don't necessarily have to take the exact same one. I know I have two. And in my case, maybe I want that extra piece to actually be involved. So I'm gonna go ahead and move that one. Boop. And put it accordingly, rotate, and do what they call in the business manual creation. So there you go, there's my stair. Now it's missing the top piece, which I could make in chipboard, I could make in basswood, but essentially for the laser cutter, dang, I just need to make 10 of those. Now obviously I can't get that bottom piece, so I may want to, I think I deleted it, but I could put it at the top though, especially if I knew how big everything's supposed to be. I could do a rectangle and actually make that piece. Does that make sense, guys? So again, I could do this in 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. You're not necessarily limited that, oh man, just because I don't have a model of it, I can't send it to the laser cutter. That's not true, because I can make 2D essentially everything. In fact, we used to even like etch perspective views into materials because we could, right? We could make 2D and then we could laser cut actually in 3 different line weights because we can choose 3 different powers, and we can make some badass drawings. Now, I usually do that in the summer because, well, we're kind of limited to the laser cutter, but I still like to show that the laser cutter works. But again, potentially there's so many options, and shoot, just type in laser cut artwork in Pinterest and you'll get plenty of ideas. Either way, maybe not necessarily for model making, but definitely ideas for art. Anyway, and graphic communication. But relatively speaking, again, I'm not finished here. I need to take that, top view it, and make 2D. And this is definitely where things start to get very unorganized, and you definitely want to start keeping track of everything. That is definitely where I'd probably show all my other elements. I'd get that previous scaled piece, if you will. So I'm going to make a copy of that one. And I like that rectangle border because, well, it's already to a 1/8 scale. And I can already immediately see how big some of these pieces really are, at least compared to the final board. Does that make sense, guys?
I want to remember where all of this goes once it's printed.
Organized, right? So don't get me wrong, it doesn't have to be kind of left to your memory. I have a pretty good memory, so I usually just do it by memory. However, you can always add text, and you could say, you know, first stair. And then you could even be super specific. You could say without top pieces, or, you know, things like that. And again, it might kind of help you. I'd kind of put it on the outside. But again, always label these things. Also, half the time that we do these things in architecture, we're usually in a group project. Let's face it, sometimes you're sick and you got to hand this off to a partner. And they're like, oh, shit, I don't understand the mind of Wilson. You know, so, you know, Robert may need actually some of that extra information to understand where Wilson's thinking was. Kayla brings up a really good question. How do I keep track of all this? That is exactly what I kind of want to go over. Obviously, I know that I'm going to need multiple pieces, so I'd even make a copy of these multiple pieces. I may even, especially at other schools, you don't even get to touch the laser cutter. Another operator works your pieces for you. And honestly, if you don't have any notes on it, I used to be one of those operators that'd be like, well, you don't have any notes on it. It doesn't say basswood or not. So, and then they'd come back and be like, I want it on chipboard, and be like, how the hell am I supposed to know that, right? Unless you label it somewhere, right? So we do often see a digital file, or at least an operator will, when they send it to the laser cutter like a printer. So if you have something like this that says all cardboard, that might be a really good reminder not only for you, but also the worker. So let's say, I could be really specific, 1/8 inch cardboard. There is 1/16 cardboard, by the way. We don't really need it for this project, but it does exist. And that is definitely how I would start to be organized, right? Maybe this one's basswood. Maybe I have a certain piece of the basswood, and I know that it's actually 6 inches by 24 inches. So I can even get a piece with inside that piece if I know I have another basswood piece. Does that make sense? The world is our oyster here. However, it does make it confusing because there is just so many things that we can actually do. So we got the stairs a little bit. I do want to go over also that potentially you don't necessarily have to use the laser cutter always. So for instance, you could print this out on a regular piece of paper, right? You could stick it to Illustrator, make sure it's the right size, put it on a letter size piece of paper, tape it onto a piece and cut it out, right? Nothing wrong with that. And arguably that saves us not only some time, accuracy, but, well, cutting by hand, at least in some people's opinion, actually looks better than a laser cutter. Why? Kind of because of the Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 4 effect. Again, imperfection is perfection. It is kind of weird, but too much imperfection is imperfect. It's kind of a paradox, if you will. But very often our hand-cut models look better because they look like they were made by hand. They look like talent was involved. They don't look like an AI piece of artwork, where often some people's mentality of art goes, well, that looks too much like AI. And they form a lower opinion about that piece of artwork. Same thing applies here to a model. Very often when it looks laser cut, it looks almost like you didn't do anything. Oh, you just sent it to a machine is often what it communicates. So again, how to eliminate that is up to you, whether it be sanding or doing particular pieces by hand. However, just to continue, as you can see, I am exploding this piece. So very often, especially to Kayla's point, I usually delete the pieces as I go. That way I don't end up making the same pieces over and over again. So potentially, just to kind of play along, guys, I'm gonna start deleting these pieces, right? Or hiding them, whichever is kind of nice for you. Also, once I finish a piece, I put it on the board. That way, I kind of know that it's done. I know that it's topography. I already know that I have that piece. And again, I have a copy of my model, so I'm not worried about like, oh crap, it's gone forever. No, I have a copy. I have copies of a copy, right? So again, I could potentially save time and not have to do this over and over again. But yeah, once I have the piece, like, shoot, get rid of it. Otherwise, it just gets very cluttered, right? I already had that piece, so again, move it to my artboard or my laser cut potentially, or even just a print potentially. The next thing I wanted to show is, like, for instance, we can also work smarter for things that we know that we aren't going to laser cut. Like, for instance, I just said the dowels won't be laser cut. They look bad, they got lots of burn marks, and arguably they have burn marks on only two sides and then it's like clean on the other. It just looks weird. So just buy the basswood. It trust me, it looks much better, and you can kind of tell which students have a lot of burn marks and which ones don't, right? Some of them actually look like they were handmade even though they were completely laser cut. I'll bring that one in because it's my favorite, and it's not actually finished. It took them that long. But it goes without saying, arguably one of the better looking ones. But from here, another thing that we can do is, well, I know that potentially I have a certain number of dowels. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and I would count them, right? But potentially I could take this one and make 2D that as well. Why would I make 2D that? Well, if I print it out and I've got a bunch of, say, 2 foot long, I could just line it up with the paper, cut, line it up with the paper, cut, line it up with the paper, cut. I don't have to sit there with a scale. I don't have to sit there, measure every single one. You guys go where I'm going with this? So I take that piece. Obviously, let's say I have, I don't know, 20 of them. So, well, maybe not. I have less than 16. So let's go with 12, right? So I could array it. I could spell array correctly. There we go. In my case, I want 12 in the X direction, enter. I want 1 in the Y direction, and 1 in the Z direction. So I'll take that and just make a couple. Oop, went the wrong way. Let's try that again. So 1 in the X direction, 12 in the Y direction. And we could do that. Oop, try that again. No! Array can be particularly tricky. You gotta hit enter to keep it. But potentially I could make 2D this and print that out on a regular piece of paper. I can even have that ready to go too. So a regular 8.5 by 11, I do have to do that calculation again. So let's see, 8.5 times 8, well, Don't feel like doing hardcore math in my head today. 8.5 times 8, exactly 68 feet. So we'll go with 68 feet. And 11 should be 88 feet, because I could do that one. And voila, we have a regular sized piece of paper that I can print out. And to be fair, I don't even really have to take this into Illustrator. We could print it, so Command P. I'd make sure that my window is now set to something else, right? Not that 2x4, but I'd make sure that it was, of course, the right paper size, and then just print that out, right? You could even save it as a PDF from here. Arguably, I don't care about the color or the line weight, because I'm just going to use it as a template to potentially cut my dowels. So again, time saver here, right? Now I can get all my dowels and all the different sizes that I have. Arguably, we used to do, even just in regular studio before a laser cutter, we would do stuff like, you know, the grids, or the very specific grids that we have, and we'd lay out actually to glue our dowels onto the piece of paper, and we'd line it up with the piece of paper, and when it was done gluing, you had the whole shape. Does that make sense? So again, I can't express this enough. I know I'm kind of getting giddy and excited about it, because often I would have professors go, how did you do this? How did you make this so well, right? And it was because I would often make these other jigs, or I'd make these other components. I mean, for instance, I could also laser cut this out of a board and line them up inside and really make them perfect. Now it looks like it was handmade, and yet it has the perfection of a computer. Arguably, some people would say, like myself, that even classical architecture is like this. Have you ever noticed in classical architecture they never messed up once? What were they using? Oh, primitive tools, just chisel, yeah, didn't mess up once with a chisel, bro? Have you ever chiseled anything? Anyway, I digress. But arguably, I hope that's making some sense. Like, if I cut this out of a board and then line them up, shoot, dude, that makes it way easier, and it makes me look like a powerhouse, right? And I don't have to work as hard in measuring and getting that sense of accuracy. But again, labels go a long way, so I'd copy that one. And I'd want to maybe remind myself, I mean, let's face it, sometimes we're working like off of 36 hours of no rest, right? And we're like, man, what was I doing again? So again, saying like a laser cut jig could be enough to remind us or remind somebody else that, hey, laser cut that out and use it, right, as a piece. What else? A lot of stuff to run into. But again, really just kind of the tips and tricks. Now, I'm not necessarily going to do this the entire video, right? But you really would want to break it down piece by piece and start to eliminate as you go, right? We just got that one. We arguably got that one out of the way. I guess I forgot this one, so maybe we need 11 pieces and just glue those together. It's up to you, is what I will say. Because after all, this is where it doesn't count so badly against you, right? It's not a studio course. And arguably, if the model doesn't turn out well, you don't have to put it in portfolio. You got a digital model that we're gonna start to render in Exercise 6 and start to do really cool things and make it look very realistic and all those kinds of things. I mentioned last time that we're also getting Lumion, so I hope to use that for Exercise 6. Since I'm not gonna be teaching you Revit, I do wanna teach you another game secret, which is Lumion Pro. Arguably majoritively used in the professional world, but arguably also the Instagram of architecture, right? It's like literally filters upon filters. You can make grass look like real grass, and you can make materials look like real materials on a whim. Arguably even easier than Rhino. However, we can take our digital model and put it right into Lumion, click on certain materials, and bam. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say Instagram. But in that sense, I will leave it here for today, but if there's any major questions, let's get them on this video. Anybody want me to unroll something specific?
I was just wondering, the way you said like, oh, there's like 11 stairs, even though there's like different height and whatnot, would you still print the same one stair?
Now, don't get me wrong, you'd have to make those pieces and then glue them together perfectly, right? So Wilson's question is, you know, even though you made each of those stairs, is that gonna work? Well, here will be this tricky part, right, is gluing that right back together, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I could kind of do this as one piece, right? Like this outside stringer, this face, to this face, to this face. I mean, you could unroll that entire thing, right, and really put it all together as one piece, but arguably our laser cutter is only so big. So you might want to test some things that you unroll. But as I was mentioning, like for instance, let's take it. Let's unroll it actually, just to kind of prove a point. Unroll. Now, this is very dangerous, but if you hit explode, check out what happens. It really breaks it down into every effing piece. Which, yes, this is what I meant by that won't fit on a laser cutter. However, potentially it could fit on a piece of paper. And I could actually use other material or place it on top to cut that out effectively myself. However, some of these, it's like, dude, just laser cut that. Dude, oh, there's that platform I needed. You see what I mean? So don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with trying some things out. After all, I can edit undo. It's not the end of the world. But that may be actually easier to make 2D and take those pieces. And you may actually just need to count how many pieces you need. And that's a great way to do it because, well, it exploded every piece that I needed. Let's redo that real quick. Shoot, you can even redo stuff, which is just amazing. Sorry, undo, delete, redo, unroll surface. But potentially I might need some of those pieces, and obviously as you can see, some of them are repeating, right? If I wanted to verify that they actually are the same piece, I could. So I could actually move this one and go, is that really the right piece? Is that really the same? It is. So that is kind of nice. But I could also verify, oh crap, I thought I needed 11, but I forgot I need both sides. I need 22 of them. Those kinds of things. So this is what I meant by it does take a little bit more math. It does take just a little bit more critical thought. However, at the end of the day, when you're making this model and you go, oh crap, I've only got 21, I needed 22, just go cut another one. Not the end of the world. However, in studio, this starts to get really complex, right? For instance, Boguslav's D2, they're going to be working on a very complex model that's not made of regular pieces. And very often, some of those pieces are better to make by hand. Some of those pieces are better to make on laser cutter. Some of them are better to print out for what Rhino does best. And some of them, you kind of have to fake it, right? It is just kind of the name of the game. And often in architecture, especially the digital realm, we make things that are impossible. They overlap. They don't Boolean difference. But they look good, you know, at least from a rendered perspective, right? So don't get me wrong, it is a little bit like this. But to answer your question, yes, right? Of course. Good question. Anybody else? All right, we'll leave it there for today, and I'll upload this one around 5 o'clock.